Well, Carl, it's good to see you again. And
Yes, sir.
to all of our listeners out there, welcome to what is the final, at least we think, part three of our discussion about education here in the United States.
And we're learning some French on this one, right? We didn't know what was past due, although I
Uh,
did take French in high school, so I did have a little insight. So I think
yeah.
it's trois if my French teacher taught me
Yes, I
properly.
think
So
you would be right. I actually had 2 years of it in high school and 2 years of it in college, and it's amazing how quickly you lose things if you don't use it.
yeah,
Anyway, we've been discussing some of the issues sort of surrounding education. Who should be in charge? Where should it be funded? What role should government have in it, et cetera? And so I thought that today we do something a little bit different, or take a look at the educational system as a whole. And you asked a question, or you posited something last week when we were talking about that, and it was, you wanted to know, has anyone even asked the question, what is it we are expecting to get out of the educational systems that exist, at least right now in the United States? And, I've maintained, and you and I've talked a little bit about this, that we have an educational system that's been in existence probably since it was first begun here in the US. It's a more of what I call a bottom up approach. We start out with young children. We determine what things they need to learn. And then we develop a path in which they can advance that learning as they get older. And at the end of the day, we kind of push out a graduate of some sort, either a graduate of high school or a graduate of college. And we sort of foist those students, those educated students, upon corporate America or upon society at large. And then corporate America or other social agencies or political entities that these graduates end up working for sort of have to be remolded and reshaped. So it's kind of like through the educational process, we've said, okay, we determined how they were best to be educated. We've determined what it is they should know. Now you take them and make some use of them. And the more I've thought about it, and especially having spent 16 years in higher education, I really began to question whether or not that was the direction we should be going. And maybe we ought to be taking our lead or our direction in our educational processes and our educational structures from those that are ultimately going to be employing and relying on and using those products of our educational system. And so you're an ideal person to address this, I think, because you have headed up numerous organizations, you're CEO of a very successful organization now, and you have been charged over the years with the responsibility of not only finding, but managing and getting production out of those who have come through our educational systems at some level or not. And I don't know how successful we have been, meaning we as educators, in providing you and other CEOs and other organizational leaders, the kind of people with the preparation that they need that will meet the requirements that you have for your organization to be successful. So I guess what I'd like to do is just kind of turn over to you. And if you had sort of a blank canvas right now and knowing what you need as a CEO, as an organizational leader, knowing what you've had to deal with in the past, the shortcomings as well as the benefits that those people have brought to you. If you could start over, what are the things that have created problems for you? What are the things that you think are missing? And what are the things that you would require if you were in charge and you said, this is what our educational system should be producing? Who should it be? What should it be? Tell us where we are failing right now in our current approach.
yeah. So excuse me. Thank you. I want to start with a little bit of kind of background and some other questions in line with what you're saying, and then ultimately leading to that because I don't know that I have the perfect answer, but I've got a lot of questions that might help get to the answer. I think the interesting question, and it really is an important one, is who is the proper organization, entity, whatever, to define what success looks like in education, and the ultimate goals of education. Who is that? And I think that has changed over time of who has had a say in what educational success looks like. We've talked about the Department of Education, and I think some of those things are maybe where it got a little bit off track of what education was when maybe it was at its best, if we assume it's not now. But as we've gone through this now third part of the series, the previous two, it really has made me look a lot at what you're talking about. I had that perspective already, but looking at, to me, obviously company needs are important, but societal needs are more important, I would argue. I've listened to some podcasts a number of times where they've talked about even one of the unstated original goals of education in the US, it really was conformity, to put kids at an early age to sit down in a classroom and structure, and you start building this conformity to a set of rules and standards and all that. And then along the way, you're learning. And I thought that was an interesting take. And you see a lot of kids, especially now, being diagnosed with a bunch of different things. Well, when you put kids into a classroom where they got to sit with 20 of their friends slash not friends and they're full of energy and craziness, it's not shocking that everybody doesn't conform to that. So then going all the way back, I think it's really interesting. I don't know that we've ever done a good job of defining what the point of education is. And I do think your point's a valid one. And I think it's probably the closest thing to reality of is it was a bottoms up approach. And so looking at it to kind of get around to your question is what should it be? Top down might be best, but then that begs the question of who is the best qualified, best suited to answer that. And I don't think it's one entity. I think it's going to take a cooperation of society. What do we want our society to be? Culture, history, and something you brought up that really it's been a central part of my thought process through all of this since we talked about it, is the liberal arts. I would have been the first to throw them out before we did this series and say, yeah, we don't need those. We need to train people how to, if you're going to be an engineer, you need engineering school. If you're going to be a doctor, you need, medical training. If you're going to be a lawyer, you need that. Everything else beyond that is probably not super useful. And maybe we need to reimagine everything. And it's funny, over the last few weeks, I've really changed what I think, and this will play into how ultimately, long way around to answer your question. I think the needs of education are much greater than a trade, or a career training just for a thing and a narrow focus of be it, doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher. I think there's a lot more that we need of that. And so what's been interesting is I've kind of circled back around to thinking it's really broken. Now I'm not sure it's super broken. I think it needs some minor tweaks that are probably going to take the amount of energy it would take to move large mountains. I'm not a big fan of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We've sent man to the moon. We've done a lot of really cool things with what we had with slide rules. And so I always like to respect what came before me and not think that, that all sucked and we should do it differently. I think that's how we kind of got to Common Core math. So all that said, from my perspective as, CEO, community leader, father, put all those things together, because I think they're all kind of equally important. I think we need to really, the small movement, I think, when I look at it, is do away with the indoctrination. That's the really hard part, because I don't know who's going to do that. And we can talk about that in a little bit and kind of the hows of it. But I think getting back to some of the roots of what education was, and I'm not talking about it in the 1950s. I'm talking about in the Ben Franklin days, and you and I talked about this. When I look back at some of the greatest thinkers, innovators, ever on the history of the planet. What education did they have? And that's where we get back to the liberal arts. So, and if I look at it from a organizational leader across multiple different industries, from manufacturing, now defense contracting, but talking to a lot of other business leaders, it doesn't matter if you're banking or you're an attorneys. The common thing that everybody wants that seems like it's hard to find right now is somebody who will show up every day. They show up every day with a good work ethic, good attitude, and and you work hard. That seems like some fundamental basic things that someone, and discipline, self-discipline is huge. And I think necessarily, I think we're turning out some people that are really sharp in engineering or, at law, at being a doctor. I think some of the other pieces is what we're really missing. There's a sense of entitlement, a lack of self-discipline. That's what's really made me, again, if you would have asked me this same question 3 weeks ago, I would have said, oh, it's easy. Liberal arts is useless. Why would you get a degree in any of that? We need to do more of the, science, STEM type stuff, and everything else is useless. I've done a 180. I don't think that's the case. And especially when I look at it, I think we're doing fine with a lot of that stuff. I think we're still leading the world in innovation and, the number of satellites being launched into space. SpaceX is 80% of the world's satellites. You start looking at different things that are not like you and I have talked about with college football, which conference is more powerful or stronger or whatever. Same thing, what universities, that's subjective. But some of the objective facts are the results of what's going on with technology and
Right.
in the world. And we still, you brought this up before, we still are the world's leader in a lot of technology areas, if not all, to some degrees. Very long way and not a great answer, but it's really my opinions change. And I think what we really need now is some of the intangibles is really what needs to be taught, and that's, cooperation of obviously parents and the educational system. We've talked about that, but I think we're missing, I don't know that we're missing some of the really STEM type things and smart people things. I think there's a sense of entitlement. There is and again, these are broad brush strokes, but and I'm starting to get old, so I walked both ways uphill in
Right.
the snow to school, I think now. But I think some of those intangibles, which I do think you get from proper university and the willingness to think freely, that to me is a big thing. We've talked about that especially at a university level, but even in high school, is to critically think and reason and test your beliefs and what you think. I think those are some things that are missing. And again, my answer is a lot different than it would have been a few weeks ago. So that's the beginning of my answer, and I'm sure we'll talk through it more. But I don't know that it's as broken as I thought it was a few weeks ago. But again, I think some of the small things that could be reimagined in a little bit of a top down model would take a lot of cooperation among a number of groups that don't generally cooperate.
Well, I hear you there. Looking at this from the perspective of not only a former educator at the college level, but also, I hate to admit it, but serving in the role as an administrator as well. I wish I could say that 16, 18 years of experience in education provided me with a lot of answers or a lot of particular insight. I'm not so sure that that's true. The one thing that I became very cognizant of, particularly in the latter years that I was teaching, uh, were the areas in which I felt like we were failing, either failing the students based on a curriculum that was being delivered or the manner in which it was being delivered, the way we were structuring classes. And because I worked in a program, taught in a program that dealt primarily with adult learners, people who had had their college degree plans interrupted or had gone into the workforce right out of high school and then decided to come back and get a degree, that sort of thing. It gave me a little bit different perspective, and we took a little bit different approach, obviously, as one would with those students than we would an 18-year-old that had just come out of high school and onto a college campus. But I still found that a lot of the approaches that we used, a lot of the what I call the architecture of education, the structure within which educators had to work, was not only not serving these adult learners well, because they were in a different stage of life. They approached things completely differently. But I began to question whether or not the approaches were appropriate or getting us the best possible results, even with 18-year-old students coming right out of high school. So I'd mentioned to you earlier that I really wanted to kind of, from my perspective on this, was take almost a what I would call a deconstructive approach, taking some of the pointing out some of the areas where I feel that maybe we have continued down a path that may have served us well in the 1700s, the 1800s, but obviously things have changed a bit. And so let me just throw out some ideas here. And I know I'm going to upset a lot of people, especially as I mentioned last week, friends of mine in the field of education, but that's okay. That's a part of the discussion here. So, first of all, let me say right up front, I have the greatest admiration for teachers. I find it interesting in our country, we really go out of our way, and rightfully so, to recognize and to honor those who have served in our military. And, one of the things that many of us have gotten in the habit of saying when we meet someone who has been in the military is thank you for your service. I believe that teachers deserve just about as many accolades as do those in the military. Knowing what teachers are charged with, knowing the responsibilities that have been abdicated by parents, by churches, by other organizations within society and been foisted upon teachers to handle, the hours that they put in, the things that they put up with, and what they get paid. I really have a tremendous amount of admiration for them. And I'll be honest with you, in the many years that I've been involved in education, I have not found very many bad teachers. I've seen a few people that probably should not have gone into the profession. Occasionally, you would find someone who didn't put forth the effort. Maybe they were a little lazy, but tell me what profession exists in the world in which that is not the case. But for the most part, what these men and women do on a day to day basis is phenomenal. It needs to be appreciated. So I made myself some notes. If I were the Secretary of Education for the United States, and I had complete and total authority to do whatever I wanted to within the area of education in our country. Number one, teachers will be paid twice what they're currently paid. They're making about half what they're actually worth. Administrators and curriculum specialists should be paid about half what they are currently making. And I know that's going to upset some of my administrative friends, but we have become so bloated administratively within our school systems, and no one is listening to the teachers, and they're getting very, very little support. And so I've got a real problem with that particular part of our structure. I believe that
Well, and one
curriculum.
thing, Randy, I mean, everybody
Sure.
talks about, oh, there's a shortage of money in education and all that. I think what you're probably going to say, and I've said it and I agree, is I don't know that it's a top line, not enough money issue. It's how money's allocated. And if you do make it more teacher centric and teacher focused, guess what you also get? More talented teachers because they're willing to go into
Sure.
teaching. It's not as
Right.
much of a sacrifice, and it can be a good profession that you can support a household on with it. And if it's that
Right.
important, that's the case. And again, a general may piss some people off, like you said, but a general broad brush statement is the administrators aren't necessarily the best of the best. A lot of them came up through interesting ranks, and they were coaches or whatever they were that became principals, that became heads of county or city boards, and they were superintendents. So yeah, why are they getting paid more just because they went that path? So I think you could reallocate the money based on the important things. And it's to your point, you could double teacher salary, and you don't have to double property taxes to get there, I don't think.
Right. No, absolutely. One of the issues that I've had, particularly in the last 20 years of observing and being involved in education, and this is particularly true at the elementary, middle school, high school area. And that is that the curriculum is all too often being written by people who really don't know that much about that for which they are writing the curriculum. And all too often, they are people who either did not like the classroom or where they failed as classroom teachers, but all of a sudden they become experts in writing curriculum that then gets shoved down the throat of teachers. I believe that curriculum, and I'll clarify this in just a second, but curriculum ought to be designed and written by professionals who have years of experience in applying that which is being taught. Now, that'll vary a little bit depending upon whether it's an elementary school curriculum, a middle school curriculum, a high school curriculum, but particularly in the upper echelons, anyway, of our educational systems. Again, I know I'm going to offend some people, but someone who has been an educator all their life, they came right out of high school, went into an education program, a teacher certification program, went on and got their master's and then their PhD, and the only thing they've ever known is academics. And they're writing curriculum for high school economics classes. I have a little bit of a problem with that, number one. So I think we need to be relying on experts in application of whether it's political science or history or communication or engineering or math. Those people should be designing and at least doing the preliminary writing of the curriculum. Okay.
Let me ask you a question around that because I
Sure.
agree, and I'm curious if because the problem is, to me, this feels a little bit like what I was saying earlier, is it's going to take a cooperative effort, because I don't think somebody from industry can write curriculum, and I don't think, just to your point, somebody who's just taught can write curriculum. Think, to your point, of you're trying to make it in your high school economics example, kids come out of school and they don't know how to balance a checkbook, which is ridiculous. That's kind of a life skill that would be nice, although it won't be checkbook, so just bank accounts in general. But I wonder if there's a solution in there that more closely aligns, and this could work from kindergarten through, PhD level, where generally if you take, government contracting, or you're doing a design project for something, the end user is the one who sets the high level requirements of what's needed and what success is going
Mhm.
to look like. The end
Right.
user, a soldier can tell you how a new night vision would be great for it to work. They don't know how to design night vision, but it's a cooperative effort from a warfighter, whether it's a gun, night vision, whatever that is, you develop the requirements with the people who are using the thing. And that's not just in the military, it's whatever you're doing. And then that requirement gets communicated to the experts on the how. So the what is usually defined by the end user, which in this case could be industry or society or whatever. And then the how you get there. And I do think that's not some people that work for some publishing company. That's where I think if you, again, pay teachers double and maybe another way for some of them to make money. And I mentioned my mom sat on textbook committees where they actually picked the curriculum. And then that became a more passive role and you kind of just got told what you were going to get. But early on, she was evaluating curriculum. But I just wonder if there's another way even for teachers to make more money is the really good teachers, and you have to figure out who those are that care, are passionate, and some department heads of math and English and whatever, they get those requirements from whoever the requiring groups is, society, industry, all those pieces, they're developed. And then some of the piece of the curriculum, and maybe not the details, but the how and maybe some of the methodology is developed from, maybe it's a top down, bottoms up, like you would do a design project to go to the moon or build a missile system. I just wonder if something like that could work because I don't think any one person or entity is qualified to write the proper curriculum. I think it would take, and I think that's how we've diverged, and we've talked about that. I think that's how we've diverged in teaching students to get degrees. Well, what are those anchored in? So,
Right. Well, I'll tell you, you're absolutely correct. And when I talk about having professionals, people in industry developing and writing curriculum, I mean, from a standpoint of input, the distribution of curriculum at all levels still comes out of publishing houses. Now, they're not always doing everything in hard copy anymore. Most of it these days is being done digitally, but they are the ones that put these things together. The problem in the past, or I think some of the problem with some of the curriculum, is that it has not been a collaborative effort. It's either been heavily academic and educator input, or in some curriculum and some text that I've seen in higher education at the college level, has been so heavily geared to industry needs that the specificity renders that education somewhat limited in scope as to how it can be applied. There has to be a collaboration there. And I
and I
do
think
think
it can't
educators
be.
have to be a part of that because they're going to have to deliver that curriculum. Now, I think the teachers should be given the flexibility, the authority, as it were, to design their own lesson plans and their own methods of delivery of that curriculum. Now, there still need to be some checks and balances of some sort, okay, in the school systems as to making certain that that curriculum is being covered. But unfortunately, too much of the curriculum coming out these days, particularly at the elementary, middle school, and high school areas, is dictating to the teachers exactly. It's almost as though they have developed a PowerPoint that they want the teachers to show up on the screen and read to the students and then give them an exam, and that's it. They have really pulled so much of the authority away from the teacher to use their own creativity, their own experience, their own teaching skills, and each of them brings different skills to the table for that.
Well, I think you've got to kick some people out of the career or the curriculum and development pieces. Take medical school, for example. Stanford Medical. You know who one of their biggest funders is, which is driving the curriculum? Pharma. So
Well, yeah,
instead
for
of
sure.
getting doctors that are trained in anatomy and the body as a system, you're turning out specialists who are really familiar with pharma and what that looks like
Right,
because of
right,
it's no different than the government and lobbyists. I mean, you've got special interest groups that are getting involved in education at the higher level. Well, in the elementary, middle, high school level, the Department of Education, that's where some of that indoctrination slips in, depending on who the administration is and what that is, what that looks like. So I think one of the things you got to do is define who gets to participate and who needs to participate, and then kick some people out of curriculum development and don't let them
right,
back in.
right. Yeah, those who have a particular agenda and it's not student centric.
That's right.
Now I'm gonna give you some statements here that are really gonna sound like they're off the wall, but I truly believe this is the direction we should go. And there are a million arguments against every one of these. But number one, grades should be eliminated at all levels. They don't mean anything. Teachers are responsible for assisting students in grasping and applying the concepts that are being taught to the best of the student's ability. We should not be teaching to a grade or to a standard established by some quasi governmental organization that is out there. Number two, I think degrees are pointless. And I have three of them, but I still think that they're pointless. They don't really mean a whole lot, but they take up space on my wall when I hang them. We make a lot of assumptions based on a degree that someone holds. But I will tell you that most all of my professional life has been spent in things like commercial design, telecommunications development, some of it in higher education, particularly in the areas of business management and finance. And my undergraduate degree was a double major in English and music theory. Doesn't tell you a whole lot about the value. Maybe there's a value in the experience of the education. I'm not questioning that, but I don't see any point in us having degrees. Now, I do believe that there are certain certifications. You can call them degrees, you can call them certifications. It really doesn't matter. That should be required for certain professions, the healthcare professions, engineering, law, accounting, certainly at certain levels anyway, where people are providing a service necessary and a needed service to society at large. And those services, if they're not properly rendered, can be extremely dangerous to those for whom the services are being provided. I'm not sure you need a degree in business. I'm not sure you need a degree in economics. I'm not sure you need a degree in political science. I certainly do not believe you need a degree in English, whatever the heck that even means. And I've got one. Okay. I speak the language. Is that what it means? No, I read a lot of literature. I learned to write, maybe, but I don't know that it's necessary. But that does not mean that courses of study should not be undertaken in those particular areas. I'm going to get to your model of that. We're probably both going to head toward the liberal arts and where that would be utilized. But I believe degrees are pointless. I believe certification for certain professions should be required in certain areas. I wouldn't want a non-certified medical professional doing my bypass surgery on my heart.
So let me
And the other,
my
go ahead.
memory's not long enough to remember your whole list, so let me say a few on a couple of these. I'll go backwards. Degrees, I fully agree on the certifications, and that even causes some interesting things. I mean, you look at now with some of the cyber and IT and different things that are going on, that's even causing some problems in government contracts with labor categories. A lot of them say you've got to have a degree and 3 years experience. Well, if you're doing cyber, degree is
Right.
useless. Their certifications are much more useful. So I agree with some of that. I will say from a perspective of leading an organization, the value, and I'm not impressed by degrees. Usually the people that brag about all their degrees are the ones that I'm not super impressed with and don't want to hang out with. I think the value in a degree, and I think that value can be figured out multiple ways. So I'm not hung up on what you call it. To me, that piece of paper does a few things. If it's from a reputable university, that has some level of accreditation, not Ivy League, not anything else, then there is a standard and an understanding that and maybe that even needs to be looked at as what is accreditation. But from a person who's run organizations, the thing that does for me, and it's not the only way, but it gives me an understanding that this person has the ability to learn. They've been through, they've researched, they've had to do things. I don't care a lot about the stuff in a lot of things. To your point, if I'm doing brain surgery, all those things, I care a lot about the stuff. But the ability to learn, the ability to research, the ability to critical think, that piece of paper, and we could call it a liberal arts certification. I mean, semantics, but I think there's value in that as a business owner, of somebody with organizations, if I don't have that, I've just got a population of people that say they did some stuff. It is a screening to do certain jobs. And again, not to say that you can't do some of those jobs, but it's an indicator of a level of discipline and rigor and stuff it took to get that. Again, I'm not I really don't care in some cases if it's an English degree, liberal arts, business, whatever, but there was a level of rigor that person was willing to go through and discipline to get that thing that's different than some other things. And if it's nothing else other than the stick to itiveness to have the fortitude to keep showing up and doing it, there's something to that.
Okay, I don't disagree with you there, Carl, but can't you see the same growth and maturity and willingness to show up and stick to it and rigor from someone who came right out of high school and went right into the workplace and
Yeah,
has been working their
I'm
way up
okay
to
to
where,
substitute that, but
or someone that's gone into the military and spent 3 years in the military, honorably discharged? They can show in some respects, I think in many respects, greater discipline more
Yeah,
stick
I
to
think
it.
it
It is
depends on
more
what you're
focused
looking
than
at.
someone who's been in a college for 4 years.
It depends on what you're looking at, and I've had this experience with 2 organizations merged together. One were non-degreed functional engineers, and one had more degreed engineers, and there was a significant difference in those. I think I've talked about it on one of the previous episodes. The degreed engineers had an ability to critically think through and push through things that the others didn't so much. Now, work ethic, it probably wasn't as good as some of the stuff I had. So clearly, yes, that's the case for a lot of positions. But just going into the workforce, again, depending on what it is, doesn't necessarily show that you know how to critically think, research, go through it. Again, it depends. Very broad brush strokes. We could go position by to be a leader of people. Do you need a business degree? I don't know. There are some things that you learn in there. Again, of is it the stuff of how to lead people? No, but there is some level of
Business
rigor.
degree more va Is a business degree more valuable than a psychology degree
No, and
for
that's what I'm
leadership
saying.
of people?
I
Yeah.
don't necessarily overvalue what the degree itself is. I think there, and again, 4 years of military versus 4 years of college, to me, you can get a lot of the same things in both of those. But the degree showing that you attended a university and you passed a set of standards has value. I think that's just it's a standard that is important. The grades thing, yeah, I don't agree with you on that because I hear what you're saying. And in a perfect world, teachers would love what they're doing and everybody's going to be making double the money. So you're going to have rock star teachers. The kids are going to love doing what they're doing and they're just magically going to learn. I don't know, short of grades, how do you know how kids are progressing? How do you know that they're hitting the standards without having grades? And this has been tried and it's been a major failure in a lot of places because we're not going to do grades because it's going to offend somebody, whatever. You find out that there's a lot of kids who were not learning because you just don't know. So I don't know how
Yeah,
you have to have a
but
bar we could play football and not keep
who's
score.
establishing that bar and based on what?
Well, that's gotta be part of the
And
curriculum development. Again, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, in that case, we should play college football this season and everybody plays. We're not gonna keep scoring at the end of it. We look at it and feel
what is the purpose of a grade?
to understand
I mean,
progress. Are you meeting a standard?
why do you have A, B, C, D, F? Should you just
Are
have
you
pass,
meeting
fail?
I would be fine with that. We could have that conversation, but are you meeting a standard or not? You have to do that.
And
Otherwise, education,
how are you gonna decide whether or not that standard has been met?
again, as part of the curriculum development, and I'm not sold.
You're gonna do it with tests, right? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about in English literature? You're just gonna
Writing
ask them
tests.
questions, "Who wrote this and when?"
Sure. Are you
Well,
retaining it?
I totally disagree. There are certain subjects that a numerical grade means nothing, and you cannot take the quality of a fictional writing course, the work that's been done, and in some way try to enumerate that and say, "Well, here's the standard. This person didn't use enough alliteration." First of all, that's just someone's opinion. Yes, you can probably do it in math. You can probably do it in science. Yeah, I can give you a test on the basic principles of geometry and how to determine that's fairly easy. But
You can do it in
what
grammar
I
for
say,
sure. I mean,
I will tell you this:
you can do it in
number
grammar.
one, we number 1, we don't hold anyone back anymore. So that doesn't mean anything. In most state universities, if you're a resident of that state, if you can pay the tuition and fill out the application, you can get into the school.
That's
Not
not
all.
true in the state of Alabama right now. In the 2 major universities in the state, it's not even close. Alabama, for the first time ever, I know some kids who didn't get into Alabama this year. Auburn has become super competitive to get into, so that's not
Yeah, but
true.
let me tell you how to get in. Take 2 years of community college, get your grades up, make sure that and you'll get in. Trust
Maybe,
me, you will get into Auburn.
maybe.
You will.
You've been out of it a few years. I'm just telling you it's different than it's been in the last 10.
But anyway, the problem that I have with grades is
So
number
how do
1,
you
I'm
do it
not
without
sure
grades though? So you're throwing it out, but tell me how you're doing it.
teachers, I trust my teachers to know whether or not that student has grasped those concepts.
How do
That
they know
teacher
though?
should be sitting with that student and with that student's parent and saying, "You know what? He needs to retake geometry. He really just doesn't he didn't get it this sophomore year in high school.
How do they
He
know
did
that without
okay in."
tests though?
What's that?
What vehicle are they gonna know that without tests?
I didn't say eliminate tests. I said eliminate grades. The tests will tell you the teacher whether or not the student is
Yeah,
grasping it.
because they're gonna grade it.
but the grade that ends up on a report card means nothing other than creating a false sense of a real sense of competition and a false sense of, let me tell you, I am not impressed with high school students these days that are graduating with a 5.3 GPA because they took a lot of advanced placement courses and made A's, because I've seen how that is mishandled. Grades are, for the most part, other than something like, I can grade your math test and tell you whether or not you got the answer. And actually, that's not always true in trigonometry. So it is very, very easy for us to put a false value, and it runs all the way up through SATs and ACTs, which, talk to any educators and they will tell you, tell us nothing about the success rate of a student in college. Nothing. But we create these little hurdles, these little fake hurdles that we believe, which, once again, and this is a whole different podcast. If I've got the right money and just a halfway intelligent child, my kid will make good grades. My kid will do well on the ACT and SAT and probably do well in college, not because he or she happens to be more inherently brilliant, but because they have, just like it's like the athlete that has the access to the best training, all of the assistance as far as diet and that sort of thing, able to go to the best 7-on-7 camps year round, is probably going to end up better than the poor kid that's, playing at South Oak Cliff High School, who comes from a single family home, who has no money, and his size is the only thing keeping him on the football team. I'm not saying you eliminate testing. Testing has tremendous value, but what has happened, unfortunately, and you've seen it in the public schools, so many of the tests now are not coming out of the schools, and they're not coming from the teachers.
I
They're
agree with
coming
that.
from the curriculum developers. They're coming from the state boards of education and saying, here is a standardized test. I don't care if you've got straight A's, you got to pass this. And that
No, I
pulls the
agree.
teacher completely out of it.
I
And so
agree
I just think
with I agree with that. I think I just don't understand the concept of not grading tests. And there are in the here's where I think I agree with you 100%. There's too much value placed on. My daughter's a perfect example, my older daughter. We did spend thousands of dollars to get her ACT up 6 points, but it wasn't just the money. She worked her ass off, and her boyfriend helped her,
sure.
and another friend helped her. And she, to your point earlier, the piece I'm impressed with is not necessarily what the number was on her GPA, but the fact that she was taking 5 AP classes at one time while also doing internships and playing a sport, 7A sport. That was impressive. So yeah, the number, I don't know that that really matters. I don't even know how you get above a 4. I was joking about it last night at a graduation dinner. How
You
you end
can.
up with a 4.4 on a 4 scale seems weird to me. It seems like you cheated or something. So I think the piece I would agree with you 100%, because as much I wasn't a good standardized test taker. I didn't do well on the ACT, and since I got into college, you know what? Nobody's asked me in any meeting I've been in, like you never asked me, no job I've had asked me what did I make on my ACT. I made a 23, and by the way, a 23 now is not the same as a 23 then, because it's been changed so much. So even standardized tests are not standard because the rules change. So what I 100% agree with is there is too much emphasis put on specifically standardized tests and what that bends you out and what you get in life. I do think they are phenomenal indicators to see where are you and how are you stacking up. But again, if you made a 21 versus a 28, does that mean you're going to be a failure versus not? No, I think that's silly. I think it has to be a piece of an overall indicator. The problem is, to your point, is who is putting those standardized places, tests in place. They also are tied to funds for schools, and whether you get your federal funding cut off or you get more. So the motive behind them is not even checkups to see if the kids are learning. So I think that's been bastardized, which needs to be fixed. So I can completely agree with you that the emphasis placed on and even in high schools, the pressure being put on these kids that they've got to have above a 4.0, and the ACT, it is doing it's having negative effects on the kids and the pressure. They're not getting to enjoy being kids because of the pressure. So I don't like doing away with scores. I think they're inherently valuable. I think the
Well,
emphasis that's placed on them is ridiculous, and I think it's causing problems.
I think the entire interpretation of what those grades indicate is off base. Let me ask you this. If the University of Texas played Oklahoma in Austin and beat them by 17 points, and Texas Tech played the University of Oklahoma in Lubbock and beat them by 28. Is Texas Tech better than Texas?
Don't know based on that one thing. That's
Well,
what I'm saying. It's
okay.
an
I mean,
indicator. It's an
we tend to
indicator.
use these sort of transactional
I
kind
agree.
of, well, and
That's what I'm saying. We
you
put
know,
too much value on it. You can't put too
this
much value
student
on it.
made A's. This student made A in advanced placement courses, and this student made A's and chose not to take advanced placement courses. The kid that took the advanced placement courses and made A's is going to be the valedictorian, and the other one's going to be graduating
They don't have
22nd in
valedictorians
class.
anymore. Huntsville High's
Yeah,
got no
yeah.
valedictorian because they're
But it
afraid they'll
doesn't.
offend somebody.
So,
I'm
but
serious.
I'm
There
just
is
saying
not
that
one.
I don't think you can read anything into that other than one chose for their own reasons to take advanced placement. Having been at the college level, those advanced placement courses in and of themselves do not translate better to college coursework than do the standardized courses. Now, I
I chose
will
to
say
retake
those
every AP class I took. I chose to retake them in college because I wanted to learn how to do it there. Claire's doing the same thing. She's taken a tremendous amount of AP courses, and it has taught her a level of rigor, how to study. Because the problem I had in high school, I didn't know how to study. I made really good grades without doing anything. I never took a book home. I got to college and got hit in my face. And so the thing it's helped her with, and she's taken the AP placement test, but even if she could use them to not take the courses in college, she's going to retake them
That's good.
for the very
She's
reason
very
you're saying it.
wise.
Yeah,
She's very, very wise there. Well, let's get off that subject because we could go all day. And that's just a philosophical issue. Let me ask you
yeah.
this. I'm just going to throw this out here because I don't have an answer to it at all. But we long ago stopped teaching cursive writing in school. Most kids these days couldn't write. They can maybe do their signature, although most of those you can't read anyway. I can remember, having to write papers, multiple page papers in cursive. We don't do that anymore. And we say, it's totally unnecessary. It's pretty. It's nice when someone takes the effort to do that, but very few people can even do it anymore. And we have word processing. So why in the world would we do that? Let me ask you this. I remember when TI came out with the pocket calculator. Now, this tells you how old I am. When I was a freshman and sophomore at Texas Tech, all of our engineering students had slide rules slung on their belt, hanging down beside, and that's how they were doing calculations. But it was in my sophomore year there that TI came out with a somewhat affordable pocket calculator that could do basically simple things like sine and cosine and this sort of thing. Now we know what kind of capabilities we have through computers to do extraordinarily advanced technical work, mathematical work, that sort of thing. Is it time for us to cast aside the need to learn how to do algebra and geometry and trigonometry with paper and pencil and just learn how to use the technology that can do it?
Absolutely not.
Why?
I'm
Why?
vehemently against that because you're focusing on the outcome if you do that versus the process. And my mom thought that for years with calculators. And part of it is, and mom had this forever, I'm going to be a whatever. Why do I need to learn how to do that? I've battled with this with my daughters of why do you need to memorize multiplication tables? Well, if you're worried about it just for the sake of getting what 5 times 4 equals or what 6 times 4 equals, yeah, you're probably right. But there is, and there's studies that are starting to show people use ChatGPT all the time. Their brain is atrophying. So, are you ever going to use, I use very, very little of what I got my degree in. But what I do use is the knowledge and the ability to gain knowledge, stretching my memory by memorizing things. Memorizing the multiplication tables is important. Writing in cursive creates coordination and it does exercise a different part of your brain. So if we're just looking at outcomes and what do you need to exist, sure, you really don't need to do anything. Just be done with education, use ChatGPT every day and AI. I just think the process of doing all that stuff is super important. I was the last class at UAH that did mechanical drawing and we taught ourselves AutoCAD. So we were mixed, but we were the last ones that did mechanical. Well, using triangles to draw parallel lines and perpendicular lines and all the things we did with mechanical pencils and triangles. And that was very, very important learning what the CAD programs were doing and how to do that. So learning what's behind that. And again, some of it is just learning how to learn and stretching your brain a little bit. And yeah, the only time I write in cursive now is when I write a check, which is maybe once a month to write the official dollar value out. So it makes it hard for somebody to change what I wrote. But I think it's necessary to, again, there's a process of learning, and education's more than just a thing and an outcome, and to your point, a degree. There's a lot more learned there.
Well, let me tell you, I spent many years in commercial design, architectural design, kitchen design, food service design. We didn't have AutoCAD. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm glad to hear you say what you did because I completely agree with you. Even though
I don't think
there are
that's the
times
popular
there are
opinion right
times
now.
when
I
maybe the
think we're in the minority.
technology I think there are times when maybe the technology is a good check. There are times when it is much more expeditious. And if we are in a hurry and we need to get some things done, we don't have the time to go back and crunch the numbers, et cetera. But I do think there is a tremendous value. I will tell you, I was a double major in English and music theory. I learned more about physics and more about mathematics through my music theory courses than I ever bothered to learn in
Yeah,
high school or
absolutely.
my entry level courses in college.
Music
My
is
English
science. It's
my
physics
English
and
degree, which has taught me how to communicate and how to write and how to read and comprehend, has been far more valuable, I believe, than had I gotten a degree in physics. Now, let's not say more valuable, let's say more applicable to a broader range of professions, which, I've had my share of
yeah.
those. So that is help. So I am in complete agreement with you.
I
Now
don't think that's the
I'm gonna throw
popular opinion right now, though, Randy. I think we're in the
no, I don't think
minority.
it is. I don't
I
think it
think
is either.
I
Now let
can
me
tell
go
you from mom's time, most people were pushing to not do that. They just want the quickest outcome, and you don't need the foundational understanding of anything.
let me give you something just to ponder and tell me if I'm wrong. And this is just an approach. I'm gonna tell you real quickly how I would restructure the entire educational process from kindergarten through graduate programs in college. You've heard, and your mom, and I know your wife was also an educator, and we hear a lot about pedagogy. Okay. Pedagogy is simply method of instructing or a methodology of educating. There's also something called andragogy as opposed to pedagogy. Now, pedagogy, just to give you the difference in what these are, pedagogy is what we use primarily in kindergarten, elementary, middle school, even high school, and unfortunately, all too often in college as well. It's where the student is dependent upon the teacher to teach them facts or teach them processes and give them direction. It works well for younger children because younger children don't have enough life experience to be able to make associations. So there's a purpose for it. Pedagogical students tend to do what they're told, and they tend to do it the way the teacher tells them to do it. Andragogy is the term came out when we started talking about higher education for adults, for adult learners based on learning because you wanted to know things that were relevant to your profession, to where you were in life, that sort of thing. Things that you could tie to experience that you already had. Pedagogy is more about learning a subject, whereas andragogy is more about tasks and problem solving. Pedagogy tends to be kind of motivated by external forces, grades, affirmation, reward, that sort of thing. Andragogy is more of internal motivators, helping me to improve my quality of life, to move upward in my organization, that sort of thing. So both of them are valid. Okay. My biggest concern is that we've taken the pedagogical approach and we have employed it all the way up through college. Not all colleges and not all college professors and not all high schools but that's where the emphasis has been. I'm the teacher. Here's the text. Here's what you're to learn. Here's how you to learn it. Here's how you are to show me that you learned it. And then later on, when you graduate from college, you can figure out how the heck you're going to apply that in a real job. Here's what I would restructure the architecture of education. Let's start with kindergarten. I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago the book of essays, everything I ever needed to know, I learned in kindergarten, and it's really cool. It's a good read,
Yeah.
a little bit superficial, but has some very very good points. But in kindergarten, the list of things that this author had that you needed to learn in kindergarten was share everything, play fair, don't hit people, put things back, clean up your own mess, don't take things that don't belong to you, say you're sorry, wash your hands, flush the toilet, take a nap, watch out for traffic. Okay, those are the little essays, and they all have tremendous value, and we can all find ways to apply those to our adult lives.
You know who
Okay,
could benefit a lot from a lot of those right now?
what's that?
Our
Yeah, yeah, well, and members of both houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and yeah, you can apply that to
Maybe
a
we need
rather broad
a
spectrum
refresher
of
on
folks.
kindergarten when we're 50.
But in kindergarten, that is where the emphasis should be. Yes, we learn things like our alphabet, and we learn our numbers, and we learn our colors, and this sort of thing. But those are almost superficial, and most of those are things we're learning on TV anyway as children. Get to elementary school, and my belief is that reading, writing, and arithmetic. You get to elementary school, we should really begin focusing on teaching the basics of how to read, how to communicate, how to write, how to understand at certainly at an elementary level what is being said in a story, that sort of thing. And without going into great detail as to how I would structure the courses and that sort of thing, is that all that would be taught? No, but that's where the emphasis would be. And we would not allow other social engineering curriculum to go in and start usurping the time that should be spent on these basics. At middle school, I would continue with further development of reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. And here's where I would really begin to add in what I would call sort of a serious look at science. Now, maybe in elementary school, we planted a seed and we talked a little bit about how things grew, but adding science, geography, social studies, God, we need to know, our kids need to know something about how the political structure and how it works. And it needs to happen early. History. So I would add those things in middle school. When I got to high school, and by the way, this idea of pedagogical learning and when do we switch over to andrological, which is more application oriented and that sort of thing. I think we need to stop the pedagogical approach by no later than the fourth grade. We should have our students should have a basic understanding of how to at least somewhat think critically, question things, develop the answers themselves rather than memorizing the answers and regurgitating them on a test. I would do that as early as possible. I think by fourth grade, certainly no later than fifth grade, we should be able to make that switch. Unfortunately, that's not happening. When I get to high school, if I've got that proper foundation, here's where I introduce my lattice work of mental models of the liberal arts. And the kids will go deeper into a study of science, economics, history, politics, communication, this sort of thing, and begin to learn through this lattice work of mental models, and that's not my term, there have been volumes written on this, and how these things interrelate and how you develop critical thinking and how you apply that to varying situations. That should be the emphasis, not spending, a 90-minute class every semester, every week on how to prepare for the SAT or whatever. Less specificity. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't teach some advanced computer courses and this sort of thing, but I think the philosophical underpinning of the coursework should be following this liberal arts model so that by the time these kids graduate from high school and they make a decision, am I going to go straight to work for Google because I'm a really good programmer and I'm smart and they say I don't need college? Okay, that's fine. Are they going to go to a technical school, a community college, or whatever and learn some sort of a trade? Or are they going to go into a 4-year college? And again, I've already mentioned this a little bit. You get to the college level, and this is
Let me
going to
ask you
sound
before you get
odd.
to college. Let me ask you
Okay.
this: what do you think about? And I'm whether it's fourth grade, fifth grade, I'm on or in agreement there with you on that. And I think you got to switch toward from a learn these things to a learning how to learn type culture. What about kids who aren't gonna, some kids don't like the structure of that education. It doesn't fit. They don't want to be in a classroom. It's evident when you're in the fifth grade that some of these kids don't want to go to college. They do want to get out. They're going to want to be a plumber, electrician, whatever that is. Um, I believe as you start getting into, between eighth, ninth, 10th grade, somewhere in that arena, and I don't think it's testing. I think it's a passion. I was talking to Allie about this the other day of, you and I talked a little bit about it, of pursuing passions, and forcing a kid down a route through high school that they're never going to go versus no, they do show an aptitude and a passion toward being an electrician, being a plumber, being a carpenter, those type things. What do you think? I mean, I think somewhere
No,
in
no,
the
I
eighth, ninth grade, you
understand.
got to start introducing
So
that.
you're saying don't eliminate shop. and
Yeah,
don't eliminate home ec as we used
we
to have it when I was in.
100%.
No,
We have, and I
I
think that's a
completely
mistake.
agree. And in fact, I used a misnomer. I said after you get out of high school, now you're looking at college. I want to strike that word from the vocabulary. Now you're looking at further education. I
What
even
is
hate to
that?
call it higher education,
You're focusing on
further
career.
education.
What are you gonna do for the rest of your life, and what's your career?
Exactly. Now, here's where it's going to get really, again, a little bit strange. Some of it's a reiteration of what I've already said. There would be no degree offerings because the degree doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. It might tell me that if I had an English degree, that I took a few more literature courses than the guy that's the business major. It's still irrelevant. It really is irrelevant. Okay. There would be, however, certifications going back to that. We could call them degrees in the healthcare, the health science, whatever, in accounting, in law. But there would be those curriculums that would be available. Primarily, you're going to school to learn the things that not only you are interested in, but that you believe are the will lead you more closely down the path that you want to follow professionally, understanding that that could change at any point in time. Prerequisites would not be required to take a course in a manner in which we're going to restrict students from taking a course. There should be prerequisites that would protect students from taking a course if they are unprepared. So I have no problem with saying, hey, you cannot take this level of physics without having shown that you can pass this level of physics because it's a waste of the students' time and money. It harms the other students who have to listen to the teacher try to explain more clearly. So in terms of obviously, if you're in one of the certification programs, there are certain things that would be required. But I should be able to go to a school and achieve further education without having to declare a major, without having to look at completing a degree plan, but just gathering and experiencing experiencing the educational process, gathering the knowledge and the experience that I can then utilize later on. Some of that is going to be just technical training. We would have those programs available for those who want to be plumbers, who want to be electricians, who want to be sheet metal workers and want to use the latest in the computerized presses and shears. And I used to do this, by the way, one time when I was in graduate school. I used to be able to actually weld stainless pretty well. So there are things that I've learned, but those are tremendous professions where you can make a ton of money, certainly a whole lot more than a school teacher these days. Those things need to be out there that can teach specific skills, specific abilities that follow the interests and the passions of these students. You should also have out there liberal studies. If someone wants to study 17th century French literature and they want to take 6 courses in that, more power to them. If that's what you love, I don't know how you're going to ever make money in it, and you probably won't, and you probably don't care. That's okay. I'm not saying that we restrict or we eliminate any courses. I think we eliminate the requirement that you must take these courses in order to get this degree, which proves you're capable of doing that, because I think that is a false assumption on the part of everyone involved. So, the higher education or the continued learning after high school, I think there needs to be some structure and intent and purpose all the way through high school till those kids turn 18 and now they're adults. They can do whatever they want to. If they're 18 and they're still a sophomore in high school, guess what? They don't have to keep going to school if they don't want to. But beyond that, have the educational opportunities available, have the proper curriculum, the proper teachers to be able to, but let's quit putting everybody into this box. And in order to get my BA in management at the University of Alabama, I must take 70% of these courses.
So
Otherwise,
where's the history of that? Why does that exist?
that is a very, very good question. I don't think it became, there was a lot more flexibility from what I understand, and not in my lifetime. Okay. But I've talked to some of my teachers who were educated in the 50s and 50s at the college level. And they said that while there were fewer course offerings, for one thing, which is why, and who came up with you'd have to have 132 hours or whatever that happened to be, I'm not sure. There were fewer course offerings, so there wasn't as much flexibility. When, with the advent of government funding of higher education, student loans and grants and that sort of thing, institutions of higher learning saw a chance to expand their course offerings, grow their campuses, add buildings, add faculty, add administration by adding a whole bunch of classes, of courses. And at that point in time, it became almost essential that you're not going to have a course at Texas Tech University that has no application to any major, even meat judging. Okay. It's going to be tied to an agricultural major or something of that sort. And so it began to not only grow in terms of the number of hours necessary to get a degree, but you began to have to take a greater variety of courses as well. Why? Because you got to justify why you're paying those professors to teach those particular courses. Well, it's
Yeah.
required for this major.
Yeah. If you
Okay.
don't do that, I mean,
So
clearly, if you did your model, and again, we could unpack it for a long time. I think I always like to understand why something is before I go abolish it all. That's why I'm curious how we got to where we are. I do think you're right, though. I mean, some of the courses clearly, again, liberal arts, I think there's a lot of value in a lot of those, whether it's 17th century art study or whatever. The broadening your ability to think and reason and understand, I think is important. It creates a more well-rounded human and citizen. The problem is, I don't think you would have as many people teaching 17th century art if it wasn't required for a degree. So I do think the why it's there is a problem. So that's intriguing. I mean, I think that's right. Again, we could talk for a long time about degrees, not degrees, and all that. And once you're 18, you should have the ability. And I do think the tail's wagging the dog a little bit. I think you're right. And why are there requirements for X number of hours? And you got to have these courses that have nothing to do with this thing. It's so some professor has a job and you get to build a new building and somebody gets to name a building after themselves. I mean, I think the tail started wagging the dog a little bit on that. So definitely agree with that. And again, I go
yeah,
back to
well,
your St. John's University and, some of these other ones that are heavily focused on university. I don't know if Ben Franklin had a degree. It'd be interesting to go look. That's something I'll do later. But clearly, some of these people way back that were thinkers and, Albert Einstein's, I don't know if he had a degree, but I have to go look at some of these. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It sure seemed like it wasn't a degree like it is today, where you had to have this many hours and this many things. It was a learn. It seemed to be what you're talking about switching to as you kind of get into the fifth grade and beyond. Of their education really taught them how to learn and explore and innovate and find new ideas. I think Elon's a good example of that. He has a physics and an economics degree. Neither one of them necessarily taught him how to do the things he's done. I think they helped him get down a path and he was curious and learning how to learn. Again, the whole system and grades and degrees and all that, figuring out how to unwind that. I think the spirit of what you're saying, especially when you get to college, it really is more about creating a well-rounded human with a specialty that is learning how to learn. And instead of giving somebody a fish, you're teaching them to fish. That spirit, I think I agree with. Again, I would love to understand more, and I'm curious. So I'll go spend time looking at it of how did some of these structural norms get in place. But now I think we're just doing it because that's the way we've done it for so long.
well, and I will tell you, just as you and I have talked about, if we don't get NIL and conference realignment and portals and that sort of thing under control, the CFP under control, we're going to end up ruining and losing a sport that we all love. If
I
we
got a
don't,
statistic
if
for you around that. I mean, that
education,
let me give you a statistic on that. Let
okay,
me give you a statistic on that I think is very intriguing, because I think it's the same thing with education, and whether it's Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It was a little shocking. The SEC released a list for 24 and 25 of athletic donations 1 through 10. Texas was number one, 168 million. That's across all athletics of what was donated to the university. I was very shocked. Tennessee was number 2 at 110. OU was number 3 at 92. But then what was interesting is Texas A&M was number 9 at 50 million. So it's
wow.
very intriguing where you wouldn't even think some of these, but if you look at what that's driving, it is a little bit of the same thing. If we don't get some bounds around this, when you start looking at the disparity, University of Florida is 49 million and Texas is at 167 across all sports. And I think you're right. That's a real issue. There's got to be some longer term planning of not this season and next season. Well, I think it's the same thing in school. It's not just this academic year and next academic year, but let's zoom the lens out and what's 5 to 10 years down the road looking like. And I had a question, what should education prepare students for the world as it exists today or the world that's coming? And I think right now, I don't know that we're answering either one of those questions, but I think we do have to. And again, the how, and you and I can banter back and forth on grades and degrees. I don't think that's that's the most important thing to solve. I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of what we started with. The most important thing to solve is what the heck is education for? And until we can properly answer that, and what does the successful outcome look like, the how to me is the least important part of it that can easily be figured out once you figure out the what.
Well, let me answer one of your questions. You asked, are we preparing students for what is now or what's coming down the road? We don't have any clue what's coming down the road. It's changing too rapidly. And we couldn't create a curriculum now based on what we think is going to be needed in 4 years,
But I
because
think you
in four
could.
years, the things that will be needed. So it's more of, it's not the specificity of what we're teaching. It is the critical thinking. It's the
That's what I'm
ability
saying.
to
So how
read
do
the
you do
world
that? Is you
around
do
you.
less of the specific and you create more of the critical thinking, the liberal arts. You create a more self-disciplined person who's adaptable and willing to learn for what comes in for. That's how you
Right. And I was
prepare
going
for the future.
what I was going to say is that if universities in particular, because I do think it's going to be top down, not bottom up, if they don't get their acts together and and correct some of the not only gross inequities that exist in education, but just the bad policy and bad programs. Here's what's going to happen. Just like I've said, if college football does not get its act together, the NFL will come in and create a minor league and say, we'll take all
Yeah.
the good high school players and
Yep.
you guys can start playing club ball.
Yep.
What's going to happen is the big corporate entities are going to, they've already started it. We've talked about this, but it's going to become much, much more prevalent that they're going to be telling high school students, good, intelligent, hardworking high school students, don't go to college. Come and work for us. We will teach you what you need to know, and you will develop as a person and in this profession right on the cutting edge with us.
And I think,
Because
Randy,
guess
that's
what?
coming quick. I think in the next 5
I know it
years, you
is.
could see universities be irrelevant completely.
I think if we're not careful, that's exactly what's going to happen. And I hate it because I do think that there, excuse me, is some value to that experience
Yes,
of being with kids that are similar age. You're
100%.
you're becoming adults and you're learning new things away
To
from
me,
home
that's
or
the
away from high
only at the
school.
end of the day, unless you're gonna be a brain surgeon, a lawyer, at the end of the day, to me, the number one value you're getting, and I don't think you're getting all your money's worth because it's expensive, but the number one thing that I'm excited about Claire going to learn and eventually Kaylee is that whole process of being around
Yes,
humans, figuring out who the heck you are, and becoming an adult.
right,
That's
right.
to me, the only value that's really left at a high level to say, why am I adamant that I want my girls to go to school is that. Beyond that, I don't know that there's another value they'll walk away with.
Now, if Auburn and the University of Alabama will just take our advice on how to approach degrees, how to approach programs of study, et cetera, then that'll be a great experience.
Well,
Okay.
I think they could. Again, I think we could fix that if we could agree on the what we're trying to accomplish. It's the same thing we've talked
Right.
about with the college football
Right.
playoff and all
Right.
that. And which conference is better? I don't know. What are we taught? What's better? Well, what is college? What is higher education? What is education? Until we answer what it is and what we need it to be, how we're going to do it, you can give 1,000 different good ideas, but it doesn't matter. It's not unto
No,
anything.
totally agree. I'm not sure we answered any questions, but I think we've at least thrown some things out there that maybe could be considered. One thing about education, though, you talk about a ship that is slow to turn around.
Yeah,
That's
it's an
it.
aircraft carrier.
Okay.
I agree.
It's one of those things that it's kind of like government. You can add a lot of programs real easily, but you can't
Taken
take
away is
anything
hard.
away.
I
And
agree.
it becomes so bloated and nobody knows where it's headed or what its purpose is other than to keep those buildings full,
Yeah, I think the
and keep paying those tenured faculty members salaries.
unfortunately, I think that's a lot of the what right now. I think that to wrap this whole kind of trio of things up, the what really is more about revenue, employing teachers, building bigger buildings, and that's at every level of education
Right, right,
versus focusing. It's kind of like college football. Let's focus on the athletes. That's kind of the main thing that they don't seem to get focused on. Same thing. Let's focus on the students. What do they need? How do we equip them? And answer the what around that. And I think if we could sum it up and say if anybody would listen to us, I think the kind of get off stage line is we have to define and not necessarily redefine, but we have to define what the heck is the point of education in this country.
right. Agreed.
Until
Absolutely
we do
agreed.
that,
Well,
it's
this has been a good 3 sessions, and I'm not sure how many questions we answered, but I know how many questions we raised, and
yeah,
that's a good thing. We're going
yeah,
to get back to the government next week, and I'm not going to put out a teaser right now. You and I'll be getting our heads together, but
love it.
it's going to get really, really interesting and
I
it's
love it.
relevant to what's going on today. So
Good stuff.
listen, you have a great week. It's been good again, and I look forward to talking with you next week, man.
You as well. See you, Randy.
All right. Take care.